Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
Hey, Dad, so if you're a regular listener, you listened to us talk last week about relationships because so many of the guys who filled out our survey on what's one thing they want to do better in 2025, they said something about relationships, communication, relationships, getting along with people, etc. So we started talking about relationships, and our conversation drifted toward, what do you do when you need to restore a relationship, when it's been broken? And usually it's because, let's be honest, we did something stupid, and we've got to learn how to restore relationships, because while we're going to set the goal of not offending people and breaking our relational bonds, we know that's going to happen. Life, our own stupidity, their stupidity, who knows? So today's show, we're going to pick up where we left off. So if you want a real clean transition, rather than the sloppy one you just listened to for the last 45 seconds, go to last week's show and listen to that show, and you'll be right where we want you, so that now we can talk about, because at the end of the show, Lawson, you said, hey, that's probably worth a whole episode all by itself. It might be worth a whole series, right? But we're going to talk about what to do when a relationship either goes south or there's a bump in the road relationally, and how do you either get back on that horse, or how do you persist, and what do you do next? And I can't wait to have this conversation with you, Lawson. Let's remember and remind our listener that today's conversation is brought to you by Range Leather. We love Kyle Koster and the team out at Range Leather in Laramie, Wyoming. If you're looking for an amazing product made right here in the good old US of A that is high quality and beautiful and durable, go to rangeleather.com. Rangeleather.com, and then use the code MJ15 so you can get 15% off your order, thanks to Kyle and the team out there. Lawson, you ready to talk about restoring relationships, buddy?
I am. And I don't know, you let the cat out of the bag that we rank our listeners, because you said if you're a regular listener versus like a subpar listener or a superior listener, you know, I I think you were like, hey, if you're just a regular listener, nothing special, tune in. No, this is for everybody, and it's about
and if you're over 70 and you hear the phrase regular listener, you may actually be thinking about how frequently you use the bathroom. So it's not what this show's about.
Yeah.
And that's not what we mean when we say regular listener.
Yeah, right. So yeah, and when we fail, when we mess up, when we do something that is, you know, the opposite of what we want to do as a father on purpose, what happens? How do we respond to that? What, you know, are we alone? Fast answer is no. So yeah, and you put in here Psalm 51 that I know we're going to get to, which I think is just one of those hallmark examples of a guy that really messed up, like horribly messed up in a number of ways, and God still used him and what he did to restore the guy, to help build his kingdom, in fact, you know. So it's like, it's not over when you mess up and when you damage a relationship. But I think it's really key for us to think about as dads, because there are some kind of, you know, thoughts that go into what happens when we do it. It's not if we make a mistake with our daughter or son or wife or friend. It's when, and so how do we handle that? Because relationships, man, they're just everything. They're everything. God has built into our DNA this need to do life together, to have rich relationships. And so, you know, and you also, just right before we got started, sent something I thought was super cool, that chart of failures that, you know, actually help in the long run.
There's only about maybe 5 things that I actually remember well from my college education. Now, some of that is because it was over 30 years ago, so I'm allowed to not remember every single thing. One of the things we did I went to the University of Kentucky, go Cats, and I got a marketing degree. And so we studied a lot of businesses and case studies about marketing and customer service and advertising. And I remember so clearly because it was something that was extremely surprising to me, even in my younger years. We studied a case study. I can't put my finger on the exact case study, but the principle has become very well written about in the marketing world. And it's called the service recovery paradox. And the way it goes is, when I was in college, there was this company that did a study on purpose. They took a group of customers and they doubled down with this group of customers and made sure, I think they were in retail business, they made sure those customers did not experience 1 ounce of service failure. Everything went perfect. All their needs were met. Expectations were not violated. Everything went right. And that was their control group. So they had these customers that they did not fail with. And then they took a group of customers and they secretly and intentionally failed those customers. They did something wrong. They either didn't give them the right pricing, or their credit card didn't go through right, or they didn't treat them well on the sales floor. There was something they did.
Oh, I didn't know it was intentional.
Oh, yeah,
I thought this was just a study of, okay.
Mm-hmm. So here's what they were doing. They were taking these customers who had never experienced a service failure in the time of the test. And then they took a group of customers and intentionally failed them, but recovered really well. So here was what they were trying to test for. They were trying to test for longer-term brand loyalty. And what they found was the customers who had experienced a failure that was coupled with a very intentional and successful recovery were, in fact, more brand loyal over time than those who never experienced a failure at all, which is why they call it the service recovery paradox, because you would think the way to create brand loyalty is never, ever, ever fail a customer. Like, that's the way to do it. Right. In fact, the way to do it is within reason, right? Is fail them, but recover so well that they go, oh my goodness. And there's stories now, for the last 20, 30 years that just multiply. One is about a guy that Zappos has told publicly about he didn't get his shoes and he was going to not be dressed for a wedding or something like that. And they went way over. They overnighted him a new pair of shoes, credited him the other ones, gave him the second pair for free, gave him VIP lifetime access, etc. over one pair of shoes. And of course, what does he say then? They just created a customer for life. In fact, it's funny. You and I have for like 3 years now, when we do this show, we use a tool called Airtable to manage our episodes in. Years ago, I noticed something in an Airtable database that wasn't working right, and I let the Airtable team know. And I was nice. I just said, hey, guys, this isn't working the way y'all wanted, and here's a quick thing. I get a screenshot, send it to the Airtable team. And like anybody else who sends something to this anonymous group of coders, I thought they're not even going to notice that I sent this in, but I felt better about myself having told them. Within like a week, they reached out, thanked me for sending it in. And secondly, the guy asked me in an email, hey, by the way, what's your shirt size? And so I told him, and about a week later, an Airtable shirt showed up in the mail, this yellow shirt.
That's good.
Because I pointed out something that was broken. And I thought, okay, I love these guys. Like, way to go, Airtable. Way to go. And so this idea in business, any truth that finds its way into the market that is true is because it's obeying some principle that God built into the universe, right? This is not true because, there's a marketing case study. It's not true because Zappos did it. It's not true because Airtable. It's true because God said so. And here's what God said. Among many things, in this example of Psalm 51, we've got David, who had just, murdered his best friend, basically, stole his wife, committed adultery. It's a very, very dark moment in the Old Testament. And then David's trying to recover from this and be not better off, but trying to make amends and restore things in Psalm 51. And what he knows is he can't do it. The only one who can restore all this is God himself. And so what we see in business is this God truth played out. That is, when we violate someone else's expectations or when we have a relationship problem, we are actually being presented with a really unique opportunity to build into the long-term future of that relationship if we handle the failure correctly.
Right. Yeah. You explained that well. And it's a good reminder for like planning ahead mistakes. Here's another example. I'll stick with business first, but you've given me some thoughts too, just in my own work life. There was a time where I worked for Home Depot way back when. They went through a very kind of corporate bureaucratic takeover by a CEO. But before that, it was still owned by the founders, and the founders built a philosophy into their business model because they knew that things were not going to always go right. And that customer service that they became just renowned for was, if you remember back, it didn't matter if you bought a lawnmower from Home Depot or not. If you returned a 6-year-old lawnmower to Home Depot, they gave you a new one. No questions asked. And their customer service reaction was built into their model, which was, if a mistake happens, you just make it better. And even if it's not ours, we're going to make it better. And they created, I don't remember if you remember that book, Raving Fans.
Oh yeah. Tom Peters. No, I can't remember. I'm trying to remember who wrote it, but thought it was Tom Peters. If I were on a game show and I had to come up with an author and I only had a few seconds, I would say Tom Peters, but I may be wrong. Somebody's going to have to Google that.
Yeah, but it's a good book. I can't remember if Home Depot's in there or not, but it just made me remember that Raving Fans. And so my point is, Home Depot didn't they didn't have a store customer service desk person.
Oh, Ken Blanchard. You know who wrote that book?
There
I just Googled it.
Which we've had on the show.
Our show. I am so sorry, Ken. I am so sorry. Although I know Ken well enough to know he wouldn't mind being thought of in the same category as Tom Peters.
With Tom Peters.
Man, so sorry, Ken. Thank you for Raving Fans.
They're both legendary. They're up there. Here's the reason I bring up the Home Depot thing. They knew that was going to happen down the road forever, every day. And so they planned in this ability to allow their people to know how to react. And so as we think ahead as dads, let's approach it with the mindset not of like, oh, I hope I don't make a mistake and damage a relationship within my family. But if I do, I guess in those moments, I'll try to figure out what to do. Like, let's plan ahead because we know it's going to happen. We know that they are going to fail and have, make a mistake, do something that hurts the feelings of their sister or brother or mother or us, or maybe something at school. And so life is just full of messing up and making it better and recovering from it. And what you talked about with that service model of sometimes when that happens in our relationship, forget about business, when that happens within a relationship, the relationship is strengthened. It's like the wound gets healed and it comes back stronger than it was before because of something that happened. In fact, I knew a guy. This was. I was trying to remember earlier if it was more than 12 years ago, but regardless, it was. So this is not recent. I was in a men's
magic
group.
To 12 years ago? Why were you trying to remember if it was more than 12 years ago?
Where we've lived, because I backtrack on so we were in Atlanta then.
That's
or
like 9 houses ago for you, man. You lived in like 27 different places.
Running from the FBI. So I was in a awesome every Friday morning men's group. There was like 10 of us, and one day, this guy, Kyle, broke down in front of us and admitted that he had an affair. It was was what he called, and I believed him. We knew each other all really well. We'd been together for years, and it was like a work kind of flirty mental affair. So he didn't actually do something physical. He didn't go sneaking off, on a date or anything like that. It was just he was enjoying this flirtatious relationship that he had with someone at work. And so it took a while. It took some Fridays of us, being together with him. And ultimately, though, what he did was he broke it off. Like he made it. He went into work and had a confessionary conversation and stopped and admitted what he had been doing. Ended that, and then went to his wife. Also confessed, repented, asked for forgiveness. But I'll say it took like over 3 years for the wife to really get beyond it. I'm not talking about they stayed in their marriage. It actually became like what I was talking about, a success story. The wound healed over and they were stronger from it. They actually kind of went on to being a resource within the church to help counsel other couples who had, had a similar experience. And so, but he also realized that the ripple effect, kind of the impact, the splash impact of that within his family, his teenage daughter was affected, witnessed it. She didn't know all the details. They shielded her from it to a degree, but it made her sort of, as she moved into her dating years, it made her afraid, or not afraid, but like suspicious of boys, suspicious of men. And she too had to move through that. Now, God was there with them. I'll say that. Then they went through Christian counseling, and but what I appreciated was that this guy Kyle did not just go, you know what, I need to stop this. I'm just going to stop. I'm going to go to the girl at work and say, look, this has gotten out of hand. It's over. Like, let's quit this crap. Like he fully revealed it. He brought that into the light of truth, knowing that there were going to be consequences, and he was scared to death. And but all that to wrap up to say, when we make a mistake, it can be an opportunity for God to use that to help the wound heal over stronger than we were before.
Man, good for him. Way to go, Kyle, and way to go that marriage and all that. I remember a friend of mine who walked through a similar situation, and he had a long affair, and his wife wanted to keep it together. They wanted to figure it out, and I remember it was months after the revelation and all the turbulence of the discovery. He called me. And he said, hey, man, this lady who I'd had an affair with is still reaching out to me. And I just said, I can't say exactly the words I used on that phone call because I was pretty direct with him. But I said, hey, man, why do you still have the same phone number? I was shocked, Lawson. I was shocked. About 2 hours later, I get a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answer the phone. And this guy goes, hey, Ken, it's so-and-so. He goes, take this number down because I got a new phone. And it was not even hours. It wasn't even a whole day. And I remember thinking, he's going to make it. Like, they're going to figure it out, because he was willing to do the work of rebuilding that. And when I said, hey, man, you should probably have a new phone number, within a couple hours, the dude had a whole new phone number. I was
right on.
In the world, I was so amazed and thought, man, this is so exciting because it looks like it's going to happen. And what's interesting is, when you go looking through scripture for guidance on this topic of breaking relationships or breaking trust or rebuilding, you said it a minute ago. It's not really if this is going to happen. It's just a matter of when, how much, what the blast radius is going to be, who all's going to be affected. It's not that we will or won't fail. It's how big is it going to be, and what all will we need to do. I remember when 5 or 6 years ago, because at the time of recording this episode, we're just now they just reopened the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris after the big fire that consumed the roof and some of the guts of the building. And I remember something fascinating to me really early after, because I had been there. I had been in Notre Dame. I'd sat across the street and had coffee at a cafe.
I knew
where
you were going to say
coffee.
You drink more coffee than anybody in America.
The point is not that, Lawson. I don't know. That is not the point. The point is
true.
I remember about a month or two after the roof burned, I was reading an article about the restoration process, and something in the article that was so obvious, but I never thought about it. Is they said, hey, well, the first thing you got to do in a situation like this is keep additional rain from coming into the building. And I thought, no, what you do is you get really busy building a new roof. That's what you do. And they're like, oh, no. A new roof on a building like this will take years. So actually, what you have to do first is stop any more water from coming in. Now, that's very difficult for a project the scale of a giant, 800-year-old cathedral. That's not a simple, and I just thought, well, no, duh. Yeah, obviously. You can't just let rain come in for the 2 years while you're getting it back under roof. And it was obvious to engineers, but not obvious to me. And I see that in relationships often, right? I see that in relationships often. Some guys will want to restore something while they continue to do the offense. And we want to help them, and we want to say, bro, we got to stop any more rain from coming in. You got to get off this horse. This has to stop, because you trying to rebuild underneath this pattern of continued behavior is not going to get it done. Like Ephesians 4:32. Let me just use that as one example. It says, be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. So we see already tenderhearted, forgiving one another. What does that verse assume, right? People are going to offend you. And what does it further assume? You're one of those people. You're going to offend people. It's not like, hey, on the off chance someone offends you or someone sins against you, let me tell you what to do if that ever happened. It probably won't, but just in case it does. Right. That ain't the way Bible reads. Colossians 3:13. Bearing with one another, and if anyone has a complaint against another, forgiving as the Lord has forgiven you, so you must also forgive. One more, Matthew 5. Jesus said, so if you're offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, stop, leave your gift there before the altar, and go. First, be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. And we could go on and on about scripture verses that remind us it's not a question of if we're going to let people down or if they are going to let us down. It's only a question of when and how badly, and then how we recover. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting analogy about you got to stop the behavior. You got to realize the behavior first and then stop it. You don't call up to get an oil change and they go, okay, well, just keep driving and we're going to pull up beside you, jump over while you're driving your car and change your oil. You got to stop.
Although I have an idea, that should be, Taco Bell should have driving trucks that have like a little arm that comes in the window of your car. Chick-fil-A too. If you're listening, guys, Atlanta, do it, man. Mobile Chick-fil-A delivery. Just like port over to me like those planes that refuel in midair and give me Chick-fil-A in the window of my car at 70 miles an hour.
That is real mobile delivery right there. Yeah.
In motion mobile. About.
There you go. In motion mobile delivery.
Why do I got to slow down when you can just pull up next to me? Come on.
That'll happen when we have the Jetsons cars way down the future. But
no question.
So let's hone in a little bit on what do you do. Winston Churchill said, "Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts." And I love another one that I found, a quote from Henry Ford. It said, "The only real mistake is the one from which we learn nothing." And so asking for help, surrounding yourself with people who are on your team, like like I loved happened to be with that awesome men's group. We rallied around him. They rallied around me in some cases when I messed up. But I want to talk through some things and get your thoughts. And, I don't have the brilliant creative marketing mind that you do. So you can actually make this better before they go into the show notes, but check this out. So there are some steps, I guess I would say. I don't know that these are necessarily in order, but when we mess up, first admit it. Like let's shine truth and fact on that error. Don't cover it up. Don't try to, sweep it under the rug. Admit it. The second that I think is really important is motive. You said something earlier about what is the blast impact?
Yeah, the blast radius. Yeah,
blast radius. Yeah, if you have done something premeditated and intentional that hurt someone, that's very different than just being forgetful and missing a dance recital or a ball game because you got caught up at work or whatever. Test your motive. Ask yourself before you even go really further. Pray about it and ask for a revelation of why was that? Why did that happen? Like look in the mirror.
And one way I want to encourage a dad listening in this specific area of motive, is one of the words in parenting that I find super interesting. In fact, I'm bubbling up an idea that's probably 3 or 4 years off about a book I'd like to write. And the title of the book might be just the word because. And here's the reason. I hear so many people, myself included, say, I did thing X, and then they say because, and the next statement is wholly inaccurate. So, for example, I'll use a very, very simple example. I was meeting a guy for lunch one day, and he said, sorry, I'm late. I was late because, and then he said, I got caught at the stoplight. And I thought, no, that wasn't 7 minutes. You weren't sitting at the stoplight for 7 minutes. You were sitting at the stoplight for 30 seconds or a minute. And what you're doing is you're blaming your 7-minute delay on a 30-second problem. And I don't really care. Now, with mobile phones and my laptop, I stay busy. I don't care when you show up for lunch. But what I do find interesting is this young man was someone who wanted me to mentor him. And I had to help him go, hey, man, I don't care when you show up. I do care that you have the capacity to do root cause analysis. Root cause analysis. Because you're going to find being late for lunch meeting doesn't really matter. However, spending too much time with a woman at the office does matter. And if you think you were spending too much time with that woman at the office because she's kind of chatty, you've put the wrong thing on the other end of the because. No, because you have an emotional itch that's being scratched by this relationship that should not be being scratched. And until you can get to the right because statement, you're not going to find the cure. And so a lot of guys will say, hey, sorry, I yelled at you. I yelled at you because you were out of line.
Right.
No, that's not true. You yelled at your child because you chose to yell at your child. Period. Full stop. No explanation beyond that.
Yeah.
Now, if your 3-year-old was running out into traffic, way to go, Dad. That's called being a good father. You yell, stop, at the top of your lungs because yelling saves lives on the edge of roads, right? Okay, got it. However, if your kid was just back talking you or had an attitude or was up too late or out late for their curfew or whatever, the reason you yelled at them was because you chose to, and you've chosen a bad vehicle for the delivery of what you're trying to deliver. So I just love the fact that you put motive in here, because we've got to be able to look at our motive in the relationship destruction, because nothing says, I don't really care about you, like me not being able to admit that I offended you, right? So if I say, hey, Lawson, man.
Yeah, well said.
Sorry I didn't show up for that podcast recording. I didn't show up because... and I go, because I was up late the night before, and the election was on results, and I care a lot about our country, and he's like, what is he doing? What is this guy doing? No, man, I didn't show up for a podcast recording because I don't care about your time enough. And that was a mistake that I made, and I'm sorry for that. And in the future, I'm going to care more about your time and our producer's time. That was total failure, and I was wrong. Will you forgive me? Like, we got to get to motive. And we got to not chuck our motive behind some, silver lining type version of it, or else we're just never going to be able to find our way to restored relationships and real relational health.
Yep. And we will have taught our kids to deflect blame, to deflect responsibility.
So true.
I think don't move beyond motive until you get that right. But what I would add is the third step is survey. So admit, motive, and then survey is like look around for collateral damage. Back to Kyle, he admitted it to his wife. He began restoration with his wife. Didn't realize until a little bit later on that as he surveyed, he looked around and saw his daughter having some collateral damage. So take responsibility, not just for that immediate one-to-one, whatever happened, but look around. The fourth I wrote was own. So testing your motive and looking around and seeing what else happened, that's great. But that doesn't land it in your lap that you say, this was, it's not because of something. I chose this, or I knew it was going on and I kept it going. Or maybe I didn't even notice, but I should have. And I'm going to own that I should have. I'm going to take that responsibility. Without that, I think the next step, which is making amendment, doesn't really fully happen. And in the notes I wrote, initially the amending is like first aid. Okay, so you've done some damage, you're surveying the blast radius, and then you start to do first aid, because that's like the first step toward healing. Healing takes longer. Amending is ongoing. And so, honing in on that amending step, I think is really, really key, because if you try to move on too fast, it could, maybe you didn't really let that wound heal, and then it gets infected. Yeah. Right.
Well, it's interesting, man. I've hurt April. We've been married almost 30 years at the time of recording this, and I've hurt April in small ways, where I'm dismissive or, don't listen to her well. And there's some small ways I've hurt her, and I've hurt her in some larger ways, broken some trust, been, unaccountable in some ways and all that. And there's no formula. But what I know is, what I've learned over time is that if I hurt someone in a small way, that amending, it may feel like putting a Band-Aid on, and, the next couple of days, things get a lot better. Sometimes I've heard her at 6 o'clock, and by 9 o'clock, we're okay. It's a small thing. It's a very small thing. Other times, I may have hurt her for a while, and like you described with Kyle, I may hurt her in a significant way, and it may take months or years for it to completely heal. And one mistake that I have made in some of those time frames is try to accelerate the healing, because I'm growing impatient. It's like, hey, man, I know I was late for the meeting, but you've now brought it up 9 times, okay? Do you need to bring it up a 10th time? And I'm like, I'm going to lean in to go, look, bro, get over it. Get over it. And that attitude of like, hey, your healing should be done by now. That's the wrong attitude. That is not, that's not healthy. That's not patient. That's not kind. That's not humble. And so what we've got to learn is healing is up to God and that person, and trust and restoration will be built when you leave that up to God and that person. And they may have forgiven you immediately, but the healing might take a while. And as long as it takes, you just need to hang in there and not try to be the healing accelerant. That's a mistake. Yeah.
You put them first. Philippians 2, verse 3 and 4 says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself. Don't look at your own interest, but each of you to the interests of the other. So you were the one that made the mistake, that damaged the relationship. Now you own that, and now you be a participant in the healing, in the amending of that relationship.
Yeah, that's right.
Then I think maybe a little bit of simultaneously, but because you gotta, part of the healing is that the person sees that you did fully own it, and they can believe that it won't happen repeatedly. I notice I didn't say again, because you may mess up again. You may do the same thing again, but I'm talking about, a pattern. And so you want to think about, how do you replace whatever it was? How do you replace or substitute that behavior with like a new action plan? Back to Kyle, part of what his wife asked was for him to leave that company. Like,
right.
She was like, look, I trust you. I've grown back my trust with you. But why do you want to stay there? Why do you want to stay where that temptation is and risk stumbling again? And so that pattern was broken by him finding another job and, focusing, putting her first, like Philippians 2, 3 through 4 says, putting her interests above his own, above his career, putting his marriage above it all and his family above it all. And that was the priority of recovery, which is the final step that I put was recovery is this ongoing accountability and support. Support meaning 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 11 says, therefore encourage one another and build each other up just as you are doing. And so it is that I'm not going to address this alone. I'm going to come to you, the person I offended. I'm going to own this mistake. We're going to talk about it. I want to be a part of the healing. I want to replace that behavior. And then I'm going to need you to help me make sure that this does not become a pattern. Maybe you got some guys in your life that you share this with and you bring them into that loop and confess what has been going on and say, here's what I could tell you the signs will be if I begin to go down this road again. And so help me watch for those signs because I really don't want to repeat that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I talk with our boys about, just was talking with my youngest son, Titus, who's currently at the time 9 years old about this, is we were talking about being honest and we were talking about what we're looking for as parents is patterns. We're looking for patterns. And it's just like you would see in like if you're sighting in a rifle or if you're looking at like a team, that continues to give up the deep pass or whatever, you see a pattern and you go, hey, we have a patternistic flaw in our behavior or our system or our approach or our defense, and we keep giving up this particular shot on the floor. Or we keep giving up this particular play the other team is running. And what I was telling Titus is your mom and I are looking for a pattern of honesty and truth. We have been observing, a different pattern. And so what you're going to find is that over time, we're going to give you room to give us a new pattern, But 1 hour or 1 day of being back on this more truthful approach is not enough for us to extend trust all the way back. So what we're often looking for is to others, we're looking for them to demonstrate some kind of, pattern that we can then rely on. You and I have done almost 200 podcast episodes. This is episode number 189. And I don't think I can count on one hand out of 190 almost times when you and I have gotten on to record a podcast. I don't know that I can count a time more than 5 times when you've been late. And I can't think of any time you never showed up, right? So here I've got 189 examples in a row over several years of you being accountable, on time, and, all that. And so I'm like, oh my goodness, man, if I were jumping off my roof and you said, I will be there to catch you, I could close my eyes and jump. And I would trust you to be where you say you're going to be at a time you're going to be. A lot of us want the trust extended back to us before we've displayed a pattern of trustworthiness.
True. So true.
And we want to say, look, man, over the weekend, I flipped over a new leaf. And so I need you to start treating me like the guy who turned over that new leaf. And everybody around you goes, we're probably going to need a little more time. We're going to need a bit. And so,
that's funny. I had a real quick. I had a sales boss that early on in my career, he said, he goes, 2 data points does not make a trend. Because I was like, man, I'm on a roll. I got my, I nailed this, and I told him the story about the sale, and I was like, man, I'm on a roll. This is going to be a great month. And he goes, hey, it's early. It's early. Keep on doing what you're doing.
I saw a stat this week that only 25%, this is amazing, actually, only 25% of people who make a New Year's resolution stick with it after 1 week. Like that was actually the stat, was that within 7 days, 75% of people who make a New Year's resolution will have already gotten off their new horse. In fact, I was texting to you and Alex, our producer, and my son, by the way, the other day about the woman from, I think, Belgium or Denmark, somewhere in Europe, who last year, 2024, this woman ran a marathon every single day of the year without fail. And it was a leap year. So 366 consecutive 26-mile marathons. She's 55 years old, has kids and a family, the whole bit. And literally, she's now applying with all the proof and all the video and, mileage and GPS stuff to go to Guinness Book of World Records to be the first woman to have ever done this. A man has done it before. I can't remember how long ago, but she's the first woman in the history who can document. She ran a marathon every single day of 2024 without fail, which I think is like
so remarkable.
Got to be one of the most crazy physical feats. And she said in one of the interviews, I didn't hear it, but I read it in an article, that the tough part, which is hilarious, because okay, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Can we just go back to the tough part wasn't the stupid marathons? Hang on. So she said the tough part was starting over every day mentally. Like for her, the capacity to run 26 miles a day, this was kind of like, not, I won't say falling off a log, but that was not what she cited as the most difficult part. It was that every day you're back at the starting line. Every day you're starting over. Every day you're going to run another one. And mentally, she found that taxing.
You think?
Wow. So anyway, for the guy who's listening, for the dad who's listening, I want you to hear that example. I want you to hear that story about that woman for this reason. Number one, that's amazing. Let's give her a round of applause. But as we think about the verses in Scripture that tell us, run with perseverance the race marked out for us, or Galatians 6:9, do not grow weary in doing well. As we're doing this thing called relationships in our life, and they get broken and have to be plugged back together, and they get broken and have to be restored, do not grow weary, and establish this pattern that Lawson talked about: admitting, looking for our motives, surveying the damage, owning responsibility, making amends, replacing it with new action plans, and then recovering through support and accountability. Use those ideas in your relationship with your wife, in your kids, and let's go run this year. Let's run the marathon every day of godly relationships and building trust and establishing walking worthy kinds of patterns so that around us we can be surrounded with good and godly relationships. Dad, we will see you next week for another episode of Father on Purpose. Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember, you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org/podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call the person up and tell them to listen in.
We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed.
Number 2, subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.
Nice wrap up, bro.